the two sisters huddled in the corner of a dim garage, clinging to each other for comfort. The older sister whispered, "Can you take her instead of me?" The lonely man paused, confused by her plea, unaware that his next choice would change their lives forever. Andrew Blake was used to being the last man out of the office, but tonight, as he stood alone in the penthouse boardroom, the silence felt heavier than ever. All the chrome, glass, and ambition in the world couldn't fill the emptiness left by a divorce finalized only months before. The city below glowed cold and indifferent, sterile, clinical, like the life he'd built. Not long ago, his work in medical technology had seemed like a purpose. Now it was all just noise, static, and the persistent ache of not belonging anywhere, not even in his own skin. He stared for a long moment at the whiteboard covered in tomorrow's deadlines, then at the blinking cursor on a half-written email to a partner he barely liked. His eyes burned from exhaustion. He should have gone home hours ago. There was no one waiting, but even so, he dreaded the quiet. In the end, he gathered his coat, shut off the lights, and let the heavy door click shut behind him. The lobby had emptied long ago. Down in the parking garage, the fluorescent lights flickered, harsh and blue against wet cement, turning every shadow into something brittle and exposed. His Italian shoes echoed in the cavernous space, every step a sharp reminder that for all his millions, he walked alone. Andrew rounded the corner toward his car, numb, already rehearsing the hollow rituals of the night. Microwave dinner, silent apartment, falling asleep to the drone of financial news. But then, he stopped, frowning. The air carried a sound that shouldn't have been there. Not the clatter of security keys or the idle chatter of the cleaning crew, but a soft, shivering whimper. He listened harder. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just the wind, or his tired mind playing tricks. But the noise came again. The stifled hiccup of a child trying not to cry. A surge of unease gripped him. He scanned the rows of parked cars, his breath puffing in the chill, then noticed something out of place near a concrete pillar, a faint movement barely visible in the flicker of the overhead lights. He approached cautiously, his pulse picking up, senses snapping awake in a way he hadn't felt in years. There, crouched in the shadows, were two little girls. One, maybe 7, sat upright with her back against the wall, arms wrapped tight around a smaller, trembling figure, no more than 4. Their clothes were thin, their shoes all wrong for the weather. Strands of blonde hair clung to tear-streaked cheeks. The older girl's face was streaked with grime and worry, her blue eyes sharp with a kind of adult fear that no child should ever know. Andrew knelt a safe distance away, his heart hammering for reasons he couldn't explain. "Hey there," he said, quietly, his voice softer than he'd ever used in a boardroom. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The older girl flinched, instinctively pulling her sister closer, but her eyes never left his. She sized him up, suspicious and heartbreakingly brave. The younger one hid her face, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit. Andrew tried again, lowering his voice. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Andrew. I work here. Do you know where your parents are?" The girls said nothing. He noticed their socks, soaked, one torn at the toe, and the older girl's hands trembling slightly, as if she'd been cold for hours. Still, she didn't cry. He searched for the right thing to say, but it was the girl who spoke first, her voice so soft it barely carried through the echoing garage. "Can you take her instead of me?" The words hit him with physical force, a punch to the chest, a chill running straight up his spine. In his 40-odd years, Andrew had faced boardroom betrayals, lawsuits, and loss, but nothing had ever gutted him like the sound of that tiny, hopeless plea. He forgot to breathe for a moment. He swallowed. "What do you mean?" The girl's chin trembled. "Please, take Sophie. She's the good one. She never gets in trouble." Her grip on the little one tightened. "I'll go back. Just don't let him find her." Andrew's mind spun. Every instinct told him to call security, to call the police, to push this heartbreak out of his carefully ordered world. But he couldn't move. He couldn't leave them. He remembered suddenly a moment from his own childhood, his mother sitting on the edge of his bed, whispering that sometimes the world is unfair, but kindness matters most when you least expect it. He let out a shaky breath, forced himself to steady. "No one is going back anywhere tonight," he said gently. "Not you. Not Sophie. Both of you are coming with me." The older girl blinked, disbelief and exhaustion battling in her eyes. "You don't have to." He shook his head. "Yes, I do." Slowly, so as not to startle them, he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around their small shoulders. The little one, Sophie, looked up, her lips blue, and for the first time, Andrew saw the raw, simple hope in her eyes. "Come on," he murmured, scooping Sophie up and offering his hand to Emily. She hesitated, then finally let him help her to her feet. As they walked toward the elevator, Andrew glanced at the older girl. "Thank you for telling me your sister's name is Sophie. What's your name?" She stayed quiet for a moment, eyes wary. Then, in a whisper, she said, "Emily." Andrew nodded softly. "Emily. All right. Let's get you both somewhere warm." They rode the elevator in silence. Sophie's head sagged against his shoulder, already half asleep. When they reached his penthouse, the vast, silent apartment felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Marble countertops, designer, furniture, priceless art. None of it mattered now. The girls looked small and lost on the plush couch, dwarfed by the luxury. Andrew tried to offer snacks, juice, anything that might seem familiar. Sophie nibbled a cracker but said nothing. Emily didn't move, just stared out at the city lights, her face tight with the effort of not crying. He set up blankets and pillows, turning the heat up as high as it would go. When he offered to call someone, Emily shook her head so fiercely he didn't ask again. Instead, he sat nearby, keeping his distance but never leaving the room. Later, as the apartment fell into stillness, Andrew watched the girls curl into each other, Sophie finally falling asleep with Emily's arm draped protectively over her. The city's lights cast shifting patterns on the ceiling, reflections moving across Andrew's face as he sat at the window, sleepless. He stared out over the city, wrestling with questions he'd buried for years. Was this the night everything changed? Was this why he'd been restless and hollow for so long? Not because he was missing success, but because he was missing something human, something real. All he knew was that he could never walk away from those girls now. The old life, the empty rituals, the lonely triumphs, felt as distant as another planet. As dawn crept over the horizon, Andrew still sat awake, watching the fragile rise and fall of Sophie's breath, the steady presence of Emily beside her. The coldest night of his life was finally over, and for the first time in years, he wondered, was it possible even now to start again? Andrew woke at dawn with a stiff neck, having drifted off in the armchair by the window. He blinked through the haze of a restless night, his eyes falling on the shapes bundled together under the living room blankets. For a moment, The world seemed suspended. Two little girls asleep in his penthouse, their breaths barely stirring the silence. Everything about it felt impossible. And yet, as the sun crept across polished floors, Andrew knew the hardest part was not what had already happened, but what came next. His phone was already buzzing. 6 missed calls, a string of urgent emails, a text from his legal chief. "Call me ASAP. This is a liability nightmare. Do not get involved." There was talk of reputational risk, legal exposure, mandatory reporting. Andrew read the messages and let the phone fall face down on the table. He remembered the look in Emily's eyes, defiant, desperate, old beyond her years. No boardroom in the world could match that gravity. He made coffee on autopilot, then hesitated at the fridge, realizing he had nothing remotely suitable for children. Eventually, he found a box of cereal and some juice. He set the table awkwardly, trying to recall what his niece liked to eat, but it all felt clumsy and exposed. When the girls woke, Emily guided Sophie to the table, holding her hand tightly. Sophie watched Andrew with shy, wide eyes, clutching the edge of her borrowed blanket. Andrew poured cereal, spilling more than he meant to. "Sorry, not very good at this," he mumbled, forcing a smile. Emily studied him, face guarded, but she accepted the bowl. Sophie, after a long pause, took a tentative bite. The silence between bites was heavy with uncertainty. Trying to lighten the mood, Andrew switched on the TV, searching for cartoons. The remote slipped from his hand, batteries skittering across the marble. Sophie startled and whimpered, tears welling in her eyes. Andrew froze, realizing just how fragile the moment was. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, kneeling to retrieve the batteries. "Nobody's mad. We're all figuring this out." A few minutes later, as he brought Sophie a slice of toast, she reached out and, without a word, curled her small fingers around his. It was only a second, just a touch. But for Andrew, it was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time, he realized how much comfort such a small gesture could hold. Later, while Emily drew pictures at the dining table, Andrew tried to piece together what had happened. He spoke gently, not wanting to scare her. "Emily, is your mom... Do you know where she is?" Emily's pencil slowed. She glanced at Sophie, then at Andrew. "She's not here. She got hurt. I don't know where she is now." Andrew's heart sank. "And your dad?" Emily shook her head. "We don't have one. Just Mom." But Dr. Rick came. He was mad. He yelled at Mom. He said if she didn't pay, he'd take Sophie. Sophie's lower lip trembled, and Emily immediately drew her close. "It's okay, Sophie," she whispered. "I won't let him." Andrew felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, heavier than any corporate burden. He knew nothing about raising children, but he knew about monsters who took what wasn't theirs. He'd spent his life fighting for control, but this was a battle with no rules, and he was terrified of letting these girls down. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Janice, his COO and longtime friend. "Andrew, are you there? You can't keep them. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. At least call Child Services." He pictured Emily's pale face, the way she flinched at sudden noises. "I'll figure it out," he said, hanging up before she could argue. He made a list: warm clothes, toothbrushes, shoes, maybe a stuffed animal. On his lunch break, he slipped out and wandered the aisles of a big box store, feeling like an alien among the parents and children. He bought everything he could think of: socks with cartoon cats, pink mittens, juice boxes, mac and cheese, bubble bath, a rainbow of markers. It all felt inadequate, but it was something. Back at home, the girls were watching a cartoon, Sophie half asleep with her thumb in her mouth. Emily was curled up on the sofa, eyes on the city but mind far away. Andrew offered her the new markers and a notebook. For drawing? Or writing? Or whatever you want? Emily looked at him, suspicion warring with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, voice almost too soft to hear. That afternoon, Andrew cooked macaroni and cheese. He nearly burned the sauce and Sophie spilled her milk, but no one cried. They cleaned up together, and for a moment, Andrew caught himself smiling at the ridiculousness of it all. A millionaire CEO kneeling on the floor, wiping up spills, trying to earn the trust of two frightened children. As night fell, Emily became restless, pacing the living room. Andrew sat nearby, letting her speak when she was ready. "Are you going to send us away?" she finally asked. He shook his head. "No, not unless you want to go." She seemed to consider this, then crawled under the blanket with Sophie and whispered something Andrew couldn't hear. A moment later, Sophie was asleep, clutching her sister's arm. Andrew watched them, feeling the familiar battle between logic and feeling, self-preservation and empathy. His old life felt distant, his plans dissolved. He thought of all the times he'd let people down in the past. His ex-wife, his father, even himself. He'd always run from messiness, but not this time. As Emily drifted off, her small hand twisted in his shirt, as if to anchor herself to something solid. Andrew sat there long after the city had gone dark, making a silent promise he couldn't put into words. "I'm not going to let you down," he whispered. And for the first time, he believed it. Morning in Andrew's penthouse dawned with the gray light of winter pressing against the glass, and a hush that felt both expectant and fragile. The events of the past 2 days blurred in Andrew's mind, a kaleidoscope of half-slept nights, awkward breakfasts, and the quiet heartbreak of watching 2 children learn to breathe again. He'd barely slept, waking at every sound, his mind working overtime. For the first time in years, his schedule was dictated not by the relentless tick of conference calls, but by the fragile rhythms of Sophie and Emily, when they woke, when they ate, when they curled up in silence, seeking comfort in each other. He found Emily by the window, knees tucked to her chest, staring out at the city as if searching for a way home. "Did you sleep?" he asked gently, not expecting an answer. Emily shrugged. "Sophie had a nightmare. I kept her safe." Andrew nodded, swallowing the urge to say something comforting. Instead, he checked his phone. Another flood of messages from his legal team and HR, demanding action, threatening to involve authorities if he didn't. He deleted them all, his resolve hardening. But he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every hour, he worried that Rick, this faceless threat lurking in the girl's memories, might be getting closer, or that Julia, wherever she was, might be slipping further from reach. He sat down beside Emily, his tone gentle. "Emily, can you help me? I want to try to find your mom. Do you know her full name?" Emily hesitated, twisting her fingers. "Julia Grace," she whispered. "Do you have a picture of her, or anything that could help?" Emily nodded and pulled a faded photo from her backpack, a school picture of her, Sophie, and Julia together. Andrew took the photo and gave her a reassuring smile. "Thank you. This will help a lot." He snapped a quick photo with his phone, then squeezed Emily's shoulder gently. On a hunch, Andrew called a trusted friend, Monica Reyes. a police officer who'd once helped him navigate a company security threat. Monica's voice was brisk but warm, and she listened as he haltingly explained the situation. "You know this is messy, Drew," she said. "But if these girls are really in danger, you did the right thing." He felt a surge of relief. "Can you help me find their mom? I need someone who knows how to do this right." Monica promised to make some calls. "Text me anything you've got, names, details, even a photo if you have it." Within hours, Monica called back, her tone tense. "I found her. Julia Grace. She was admitted to county hospital 4 days ago under the name Jane Gray. Hit and run, serious injuries, but she's alive. No one's claimed her. She had no ID on her when she was brought in." The world seemed to tilt. Andrew thanked Monica and, without hesitation, bundled the girls into his car. He tried to make it an adventure. "Let's go see someone special," he told them. But Emily's anxiety bled through her quiet. Sophie clung to her locket, fingers white with worry. The hospital was a different universe. Fluorescent lights buzzing, voices echoing through halls that smelled of disinfectant and loss. The receptionist barely glanced up as Andrew explained, but Monica met them at the elevator, ushering them through security with a nod. Julia's room was small and sunless, filled with the hum of machines and the sterile scent of survival. She looked fragile, bruised, her hair tangled on the pillow. For a moment, Emily hung back, afraid, then broke free and rushed to her mother's bedside, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Mommy," Emily whispered, her voice cracking with hope and fear. Julia stirred, eyelids fluttering. When her gaze landed on her daughters, her lips quivered in a ghost of a smile. Her hand reached weakly for Emily, and the contact, however frail, broke something open in the room. Sophie climbed onto the bed, curling into Julia's side, and Julia, unable to speak, just squeezed their hands with all the strength she could summon. Andrew watched from the doorway, feeling intrusive and helpless. The gulf between his world and theirs yawned wide, a chasm of privilege and pain. He remembered complaining to his ex-wife about delayed flights and bad coffee, feeling sorry for himself over a quarterly loss. But here, in this room, those complaints felt obscene. Julia's gaze shifted to Andrew. "Thank you," she mouthed, her eyes wet with gratitude and exhaustion. He stepped closer, unsure. "I promise I'll keep them safe. Until you're better. Until you can take them home." Julia's grip tightened around her daughters. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, trusting him with what mattered most. Afterwards, Andrew stepped into the hallway, letting the girls have time with their mom. Monica joined him, her uniform a subtle shield against the world. "You look like hell," she said with a half-smile. He laughed, a bitter, tired sound. "I feel like it. I never realized how much I had until I saw how little some people have left." Monica's face softened. "You're doing more than most would. These cases, they usually end up with kids in the system. That's not what anyone wants." Andrew leaned against the wall, feeling the guilt and responsibility like a physical ache. "I can't let that happen." Not to them, he spent the afternoon juggling phone calls, insurance claims for Julia, updates from Monica, check-ins from his staff that he ignored. Every minute was a blur of practicalities, but underneath it all, the reality pressed in. Julia might never fully recover. The girls might never truly be safe. But for the first time, Andrew felt needed. Not for his money or his business acumen, but for something real. He was here, in this mess, and it mattered. That evening, as Emily and Sophie curled up next to their mom, Andrew sat by the window, watching the world darken. He didn't have answers, but he had a promise and a purpose. It was enough to keep him going. When Julia drifted to sleep, the girls tiptoed out to find Andrew. Emily hesitated, then leaned against his side, silent. Sophie nestled into his lap, and Andrew wrapped his arms around them both. Outside, the city lights flickered, indifferent. But inside, a new bond was forming, fragile, unexpected, and absolutely unbreakable. For the first time in his adult life, Andrew realized he was exactly where he was meant to be. The storm rolling in from the Atlantic that night was nothing compared to the one gathering in Andrew's chest. He barely noticed the wind lashing rain against the hospital windows, too focused on the dull ache in his temples and the growing certainty that his old life was slipping away. Even his private phone, a hotline for high-stakes deals, lay silent and forgotten on the waiting room table. Julia's breathing had steadied, but Monica's warning rang in his ears. "Rick's still out there, Drew. He has a record, and he's desperate." The hospital's security was a formality. Nurses with panic buttons, an orderly checking the halls. But Andrew could not shake the vision of a vengeful man lurking just out of sight, ready to snatch away the fragile safety they'd found. By morning, Julia was strong enough to speak. Her voice was papery, but her words held grit. "Don't let him near my girls. Please. I'll do whatever it takes." "I just need time," Andrew promised, and something passed between them. A bond forged not out of romance or obligation, but sheer survival. That afternoon, as another threat arrived, a text from a burner number promising you can't hide them forever. Andrew made his choice. He called his driver and had the girls' things packed. No more waiting, no more hoping the law would keep up with fear. He signed a stack of medical paperwork with a trembling hand, then carried Julia and the girls to his SUV, driving them out of the city as the rain turned highways slick and ghostly. They arrived late at his coastal retreat, a sprawling house on Folly Beach, with weathered shingles and sweeping porches that faced the sea. Once a place for investor parties and New Year's galas, it now felt like a sanctuary. The wind rattled the windows, salt clinging to the air, but inside it was quiet and warm. Andrew threw himself into the rhythm of caretaking, trading business calls for chores he'd never bothered with before. He woke before dawn to make pancakes, burning half the batch, but earning sleepy grins from Sophie and Emily. He searched online for Julia's favorite children's books, scrolling through pages of old editions until he found the one she remembered from her own childhood, then paid a courier to drive it down from Charlotte overnight. During the days, Julia, propped up by pillows on the sun porch, began to heal in the way only time and sunlight could allow. Her color returned, her laughter tentative but more frequent. She coached Andrew on the fine art of braiding hair and finding socks that matched. Sophie, still shy but less frightened, let Andrew tuck her in at night, clutching her worn hair clip as a tiny talisman of trust. One morning, she pressed the clip into his palm and whispered, "For you, so you remember us." Andrew almost wept, overwhelmed by the weight of such a simple, sacred gesture. But not everyone understood. His board of directors called an emergency meeting, furious that he'd missed a multi-million-dollar pitch. His oldest friend accused him of throwing away everything he'd built. "They're not your kids," she said, voice tight with disbelief. "You're risking your whole company for people you barely know." But Andrew shook his head. "They're my family now. That's all I know." Some nights he paced the porch long after everyone was asleep, watching the ocean churn under moonlight, thinking about all the sacrifices piling up, the deals abandoned, the career he'd shaped out of sweat and stubbornness. He thought of the father he'd lost young, a man who chose to walk away from everything for a promise he couldn't keep. Andrew wondered if, for once, sacrifice might lead somewhere better. The storm outside mirrored the one within, loud, messy, dangerous, but necessary to clear the air. He started to see the girls as something more than a crisis to solve. He watched Emily giggle at a cartoon, her laughter slowly loosening the knot of worry in her brow. He saw Sophie smile as she built a sandcastle in the backyard sandbox, Julia helping her dig a moat. There were setbacks, Sophie's night terrors, Julia's pain flaring up, moments when Andrew's own hands shook from exhaustion. But there was progress too. The house, once an empty showpiece, now pulsed with the ordinary chaos of family. One evening, as thunder rumbled over the ocean, Julia had a scare. Her breathing grew ragged, pain radiating down her arm. Andrew called the doctor, canceling a long-planned trip to Boston, staying by her side all night as the rain pounded the roof. The next morning, Julia squeezed his hand, eyes wet. "Thank you for choosing us." Andrew only nodded, afraid his voice would crack if he tried to speak. Andrew's world shrank to the sound of little feet on hardwood floors, the scent of baking cookies, the feeling of Sophie's small arms hugging him tight. He realized the biggest risk he'd ever taken wasn't in the boardroom, but in letting these girls matter more than anything else. Days blurred into one another. Emily asked to learn how to ride a bike, and Andrew spent an afternoon steadying her down the driveway, Julia cheering from the porch. Sophie painted seashells with Julia, their laughter rising over the crash of waves. Sometimes Andrew caught Julia watching him with a softness that surprised them both, a look not of dependence, but of quiet gratitude. Respect earned the hard way. As Andrew sat on the porch, watching the family he'd fought to protect doze in the golden glow of sunset, he knew he had given up something monumental. But what he'd gained, a sense of purpose, the fragile beginnings of love, felt more real than anything he'd ever bought or built. The storm was passing, and for the first time, Andrew welcomed the mess it left behind. Andrew awoke to the sun pouring across the wide planked floors, flooding the house with a warmth that felt almost like forgiveness. It was a Saturday. He'd lost track of how many days had passed since they'd arrived at the beach house, but the rhythm was now familiar. The rush of the city had been replaced by the gentle roar of the ocean outside, and the distant, delighted shrieks of two little girls chasing each other across the hallway, giggling over something only sisters could understand. He made pancakes again, this time not burning a single one, and poured orange juice into mismatched mugs. Sophie burst into the kitchen wearing one of Julia's old t-shirts like a dress, her hair wild and face already sticky with syrup. Emily, more reserved, slid into her chair quietly, but Andrew noticed her gaze had softened. She no longer flinched when he sat beside her, no longer recoiled when his hand brushed her shoulder. Trust, he realized, was a slow tide, coming in gentle waves. After breakfast, Andrew found himself picking up colored pencils from beneath the table, tripping over tiny sneakers, and laughing at Sophie's attempt to bake mud pies in the yard. The house, once sterile and echoing, was alive with chaos. Children's drawings taping every cabinet, errant socks in the living room, the subtle but unmistakable scent of chocolate chip cookies cooling on the stove. He didn't care about the mess. In fact, he cherished it. Emily lingered near the kitchen, fiddling with a battered locket she always wore around her neck. Andrew knelt to her level. You know, when I was a kid, I had a lucky rock I used to keep in my pocket. Thought it would protect me from bad dreams. He smiled. It didn't always work, but it made me feel less alone. Emily said nothing, but later that afternoon, as the sun slipped lower, she pressed the locket into his hand. "My dad gave it to me before he left," she whispered. "I always thought maybe if I kept it safe, he'd come back." She looked away, tears threatening. "But you kept us safe. I want you to have it." Though the metal was warm from her skin, and the weight of that gesture nearly brought Andrew to tears. Julia, steadily regaining her strength, watched this silent exchange with a softness that hadn't been there before. In the early evenings, she would sit beside Andrew on the porch as Sophie and Emily collected shells on the beach. They talked quietly, not about the past or their wounds, but about small things: recipes, books, plans for repainting the girls' new rooms. Julia laughed more now, the sound shy but genuine, and Andrew found himself craving these moments, this easy peace. The transformation of the house was both physical and spiritual. Walls that once displayed abstract art now bore crayon rainbows and stick figure families labeled Mom, Me, Sophie, and, to Andrew's surprise, Dad. The cold tile floors were covered in blankets and stuffed animals, and the faint melody of Sophie's favorite songs drifted from the living room. The darkness that had settled over all of them was lifting. There were still hard nights. Sophie sometimes woke sobbing, haunted by old nightmares, and Emily would crawl into bed with her, whispering stories until she drifted back to sleep. Andrew often listened from the hallway, heartbreaking at how much these girls had had to grow up before their time. But each time he checked on them, Emily's eyes would meet his, and she would nod, a silent acknowledgement that she wasn't alone anymore. Baking became their family ritual. One stormy afternoon, the kitchen filled with laughter and the scent of vanilla as they worked together. Julia reading the recipe, Sophie dumping flour everywhere, Emily carefully measuring sugar. Andrew fumbled with the mixer, earning cheers from the girls every time he managed not to spill. The cookies were uneven and slightly burnt, but everyone agreed they were the best in the world. As Julia healed, her gratitude for Andrew shifted into something deeper, a mutual respect, a growing affection that neither could name but both recognized in the small, quiet moments. A lingering glance, a gentle squeeze of the hand, the way their voices softened around each other. Emily and Sophie noticed too, giggling and whispering when they thought the adults couldn't hear. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in gold and lavender, the family gathered in the living room. Sophie spun in circles to an old jazz record. Emily drew pictures in her new notebook, and Julia leaned against Andrew on the sofa. "I never thought we'd have this again," she said softly. Peace. A home. Andrew wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Me neither." Later that night, after the girls were tucked in, Sophie clutching a new teddy bear Andrew had won for her at a local fair, Emily's locket safe on Andrew's nightstand, Julia and Andrew sat on the porch. They didn't need to speak. The hush between them was full of everything that mattered. Julia looked at him, eyes shining in the moonlight. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling. "Not just for saving us. For letting us save you, too." Andrew could only nod, overcome by the quiet joy that filled the air. The house was no longer just a place to live. It was a place to belong. And as the waves whispered outside, he realized that love sometimes arrives when the world feels darkest, gentle, insistent, and impossibly bright. The days at the beach house had grown long and golden, But as autumn deepened, a chill crept in that Andrew could not ignore. It was in the sudden flickers of fear in Julia's eyes when the phone rang late at night, in the way Emily double-checked the locks before bed, in the way Sophie clung a little tighter to Andrew's arm during thunderstorms. Even with laughter in the kitchen and new routines built around warmth and love, the shadow of Rick was never far behind. Andrew first noticed the car, a battered gray sedan with out-of-state plates, driving slowly past the house one afternoon while he was raking leaves with Emily. The engine idled at the curb a moment too long. Andrew stood protectively in front of Emily, watching until the car finally rolled away. He didn't say anything, but that night he triple-checked the alarm system, his jaw set with a tension he hadn't felt since the early days of his business, when everything he loved felt one mistake away from being taken. Julia tried to reassure him. Maybe it's just a lost tourist, Andy. People get turned around near the beach all the time. But even she checked her phone more often, thumb hovering over the emergency contacts. It wasn't just the car. There were hang-up calls at odd hours, an envelope with no return address in the mailbox containing nothing but a single word written in black marker. Soon. The message was unmistakable, and it made Julia's voice go tight and thin whenever she tried to comfort the girls. Storms rolled in off the ocean, drenching the house in sheets of rain and turning the world outside into a blurry, shifting gray. The sound was soothing to Sophie, who would press her nose to the window and watch lightning fork across the horizon. But Andrew couldn't relax. He took to pacing the halls at night, unable to shake the feeling that danger was pressing in on all sides. One evening, as Julia prepared tea in the kitchen and the girls watched a movie, the house was plunged into darkness. The power snapped off with a sudden, absolute silence that made Andrew's heart pound in his ears. "Stay here," he told the girls, grabbing a flashlight and heading for the circuit breaker. Julia followed, flashlight in hand, her face pale and set. The lights returned after a minute, but something felt wrong. A window in the guest room was open that hadn't been before. Muddy footprints tracked across the back porch. Julia's hands shook as she locked the window. "It's him," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I know it's him." As soon as the power flickered out and Andrew spotted muddy footprints by the back door, he grabbed his phone and with shaking hands texted Monica a single word: "Now." He included his address, then tucked the phone into his pocket, trying to stay calm as he moved to protect Julia and the girls. That night, Julia gathered the girls close in her room, and Andrew sat by the door, a heavy metal flashlight clutched in his fist. The rain battered the house. Every creak of the wood, every rustle of branches in the wind sounded like footsteps. Andrew felt the old, familiar dread settle into his bones, the same feeling he used to get right before a business deal went wrong, when everything hinged on a single, uncontrollable moment. Just after midnight, the doorbell rang. 3 sharp knocks, loud and insistent. Emily shrank behind Julia, and Sophie whimpered, her whole body tense and small. Julia's heart hammered so loudly she could barely breathe. Andrew squared his shoulders, stepped to the door, and called out, "Who is it?" A man's voice, smooth and mocking, came through the storm. "You know who it is. You can't keep them from me forever." Andrew's grip tightened on the flashlight. "You're not welcome here." "The police are on their way," Rick laughed, a low, humorless sound that cut through the rain. "This isn't over. They're mine, and you know it inside." Emily clung to Sophie, face white as bone. Julia held both girls, whispering over and over, "It's okay. You're safe. I've got you." but she was shaking. Rick's silhouette shifted at the frosted glass. Then the pounding began, fist against wood, rattling the locked doorknob. Andrew stood his ground, adrenaline surging, but fear curling deep in his stomach. He'd risked everything to build this new life, and now it threatened to shatter in an instant. Julia nearly collapsed, her knees buckling as memories of Rick's violence rushed back. Emily hid her face in Julia's lap, but Sophie let out a small, strangled cry. Andrew, breathing hard, met Julia's terrified eyes and whispered, "He's not getting in. I promise." Suddenly, blue lights flashed through the rain, the wail of a siren growing louder as Monica's squad car screeched to a halt at the curb. "Police! Step away from the house." Monica's voice boomed over the wind. Rick tried to run, but Monica and her partner tackled him in the yard, pinning him face down in the mud as lightning lit up the sky. The moment was both violent and strangely beautiful, justice arriving on the tail end of a storm. Andrew let out a shaking breath, unlocking the door as Monica dragged Rick away in cuffs. Julia burst into tears, her body shaking with the aftershocks of fear and relief. Emily and Sophie clung to Andrew, sobbing. He held them both close, heart hammering, promising over and over, "It's over. You're safe. I won't let him hurt you ever again." Inside, the house felt both battered and sacred, a place that had weathered a siege and survived. As dawn crept in, the storm outside faded to gentle rain, and the little family huddled together in the living room, exhaustion and hope mingling in the air. For Andrew, everything had changed. He'd risked his career, his wealth, his carefully controlled life. But as he watched Julia sleeping on the sofa, the girls curled up on either side of him, he realized the only thing that truly mattered was right here, alive, safe, together. And for the first time since the coldest night of his life, Andrew Blake wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. The days that followed Rick's arrest felt both surreal and deeply real, as if the family had stepped out of a nightmare and into a world where healing was possible, but only if they kept fighting for it. The beach house, once a shelter from the storm, now became a fortress of paperwork and preparation. Andrew barely slept. Each night he sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, combing through old text messages, hospital records, and anything else that could help build the case. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from Monica, their lawyer, and Julia's advocates. There were forms to file, statements to give, evidence to catalog. Every detail mattered. Every memory had to be told and retold until the story was airtight. Julia struggled with anxiety, her nerves raw from years of fighting shadows. At first, she flinched at the sight of police uniforms, but Monica's steady presence soothed her. Monica visited often, helping Julia understand the process, and more importantly, reassuring the girls that Rick would never hurt them again. Emily had nightmares, waking in the dark with a muffled scream. On those nights, Andrew sat by her bed, telling quiet stories or simply holding her hand until she slept again. Sophie, once the shyest of them all, grew braver. She insisted on helping Julia make breakfast, and even decorated the kitchen with construction paper hearts. The court date came quickly. On the morning of the hearing, Julia paced the living room in her best dress, hands twisting nervously at the hem. Emily clung to Andrew's arm as they walked into the courthouse, Sophie gripping Julia's hand so tightly her knuckles blanched. Monica met them at the steps, her uniform crisp, her eyes fierce with purpose. "This is it," she said quietly. "You're not alone." Inside the courtroom, everything felt too big. High ceilings, polished wood, the echo of footsteps that reminded Andrew of his old corporate life. But this time, he was here for something that mattered. Their lawyer spoke clearly and forcefully, laying out the evidence. Rick's history of violence, the threatening notes, Julia's hospital records, even Monica's police report from the night of the storm. Andrew provided his own statement, voice steady as he described how the family had lived in fear and how he'd watched these children, once so fragile, find laughter again. The judge, a stern woman with kind eyes, listened intently. Rick sat handcuffed and expressionless, but his lawyer's arguments fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence. When Julia spoke, her voice was thin but strong. My girls deserve peace. They deserve to feel safe. We're not running anymore. Monica described the night she arrested Rick, her voice unwavering as she recounted the danger and his attempts to break in. The prosecutor detailed Rick's long history of threats and prior convictions. After a tense pause, the judge delivered her ruling. Rick was found guilty on multiple counts: child endangerment, attempted kidnapping, assault, and obstruction of justice. She pronounced a lengthy prison sentence, making it clear there would be no parole, no contact with Julia or the girls, no loopholes left for him to slip through. Julia's breath left her in a sob, relief so fierce it almost hurt. When the gavel came down, Andrew felt a wave of exhaustion, relief and gratitude tangled together. He squeezed Julia's hand beneath the table, and Emily reached for Sophie, both girls trembling with quiet joy. Monica smiled, tears in her eyes, and even the judge seemed moved as she watched the little family gather their things. With the legal battle behind them, it was time to build something new. Andrew and Julia used their settlement from the court case, combined with Andrew's own resources, to find a permanent home not far from the beach. The girls chose the paint for their rooms, lavender and teal, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Julia set up a small workspace in the sunniest corner, her first real office in years. Andrew traded his penthouse for a smaller, cozier house down the block, always close, but careful to give Julia and the girls space to grow. The house filled with music and movement. Julia, finally free from fear, invited neighbors for coffee. Emily made friends at her new school and even hosted her first sleepover. Sophie bloomed, running wild with the neighborhood kids, her giggles a constant soundtrack. Monica visited often, no longer just a cop, but a family friend, bringing her dog and stories from her shifts. Andrew's own world shifted. He returned to work on his own terms, starting a foundation for abused families and advocating for children's safety. At the launch event, Julia stood at his side, shy but proud, and spoke with quiet strength about hope and second chances. The room was filled with survivors, families, police, and local officials, people who understood that it takes a community to protect the vulnerable. That evening, the family hosted a backyard cookout. Monica brought her famous potato salad, and Julia's new friends filled the yard with laughter. Emily introduced her new friend Zoe, and Sophie showed off her collection of painted shells. As the sun set, Andrew watched Julia laughing with her colleagues and Monica tossing a football with the girls, the sound of joy weaving through the air. Andrew realized, as he looked around the glowing yard, that they had become a real family, not perfect, but resilient and whole. The house was full of belonging, and the shadows that once haunted them had finally lifted. For the first time, Andrew believed they could stay safe, not just from Rick, but from the loneliness and fear that had ruled their lives for too long. Morning light spilled over the new house, warm and soft, painting the kitchen walls in gold. The air was alive with the scent of cinnamon rolls Julia had baked, her special treat for the girls, who had tumbled downstairs before dawn, their giggles a sweet, ordinary music that now belonged to this home. The terrors of the past seemed distant in this new season. The wounds hadn't vanished, but they had softened, transforming into stories the family could hold together, not just survive apart. It was a school day, but Emily and Sophie lingered at the table, cheeks sticky with icing, their lunchboxes beside them. Julia brushed Sophie's hair, humming an old tune, while Andrew read the paper with his coffee, smiling at their chatter. The kitchen felt lived in now, children's drawings taped to the fridge, Julia's laptop open with emails from her new job. She'd been hired as a community advocate for women's shelters, something she never imagined she'd have the courage to do. Her confidence glowed, and Andrew couldn't help but admire the way she navigated the world, her scars becoming her strength. After breakfast, Andrew walked the girls to the end of the block, hand in hand. Emily had a friend waiting for her at the corner, a girl with bright pink glasses and a gap-toothed grin. Sophie ran ahead to join a cluster of kids waiting for the bus. Andrew lingered, watching them go, his heart swelling with pride and a protective tenderness he could barely name. Back at the house, Julia stood at the window watching with him. "They're really okay, aren't they?" she said, her voice soft, edged with wonder. Andrew nodded. "They're more than okay. They're thriving." The days unfolded in gentle patterns. School, work, afternoons on the porch, Julia helping Emily with homework while Sophie and Andrew made elaborate sandcastles in the yard. Sometimes Andrew would sit at his new desk, no longer a tower of glass but a sunlit room with stacks of books and half-built Lego castles on the shelves, and marvel at how life had turned. The ambitions that once drove him felt quieter now, more like background music. He'd learned how to build something lasting, not a company or a reputation, but a family. Julia's advocacy work bloomed. She helped women find jobs, connected families with shelters, and started a weekly support group in the community center. The gratitude in her clients' eyes reminded her how far she'd come. She shared their stories at home, never the details, but always the hope. And Andrew listened, proud and sometimes moved to tears. Together they hosted fundraisers, and Andrew's foundation quietly grew, supporting children who needed a voice and parents who needed a chance. One Saturday, the family piled into the car and drove to the beach. It was bright and breezy, the kind of day that tasted like summer even in late fall. Emily and Sophie raced ahead, shrieking as they chased waves. Andrew and Julia walked, slowly behind, arms brushing, their shadows weaving together on the sand. At the edge of the tide, Sophie stooped and picked up a small, perfect stone, smooth and heart-shaped. She pressed it into Andrew's palm. "You have to keep it," she insisted, "for good luck." Andrew closed his fingers around it, feeling the old ache of loss replaced by a deep, quiet gratitude. He tucked the stone into his pocket, a private reminder of all he'd found when he nearly lost everything. They built a sandcastle together, turrets, moats, a driftwood flag. Emily decorated the walls with shells, and Sophie placed her favorite purple pebble at the entrance. Julia snapped a photo, laughter sparkling in her eyes. Later, as the sky softened to dusk, they sat together at the water's edge, waves licking their toes. Back at home that evening, after warm showers and grilled cheese sandwiches, Andrew tucked the girls into bed. Emily yawned, half asleep, and reached for him. "Will you stay?" she murmured, the vulnerability in her voice as pure as the first night he'd found her in that cold garage. "I'm not going anywhere," Andrew promised, smoothing her hair back. Sophie's small hand found his, and he held it tight. He lingered by the window as the girls drifted off, pulling Emily's old, crumpled note from his wallet. "Can you take her instead of me?" The words, once heavy with fear, felt lighter now. He quietly tore the note in two, letting the pieces flutter into the trash. Julia stood in the doorway watching, a softness in her eyes. "You gave us hope when we thought we had none left," she whispered. "You gave us a second chance." Andrew crossed to her, drawing her close. "You saved me too." Downstairs, Monica dropped by with her dog and a box of donuts, and Julia's new colleagues arrived for a quick planning session. Laughter spilled from the kitchen. Sophie brought out her painted shell collection, showing Monica the newest additions. Emily and her friends played tag in the yard, their voices bright against the evening sky. As night settled in, the house glowed with gentle noise and comfort, a place built not from perfection, but from persistence, forgiveness, and the choice to start again. Outside, the wind rattled the porch chimes, and Andrew slipped his hand into his pocket, fingers closing around Sophie's stone. The family gathered on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars prick the dark. Julia leaned her head on Andrew's shoulder. Emily snuggled close, Sophie fast asleep on Julia's lap. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was full, but no longer lonely. "I'm glad we found each other," Julia said at last. Andrew looked at his family, at the house, at the night, and for the first time in his life, he felt utterly, irreversibly home. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that love often comes wrapped in the most unexpected moments, then we invite you to stay, subscribe to Restoring Tales for more tales that touch your heart, heal your soul, and remind you that even on the hardest days, tomorrow is still a gift. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.